Welcome to Earth Before Us, a quiet harbor where the tired mind can find its anchor. Perhaps you have settled in for the evening, ready to let the long day drift away. Perhaps you are here to let the sound of ancient winds guide you into a peaceful sleep. Or maybe you simply wish to learn something new, wrapped in this gentle stillness. Whatever your intention, know that you are in the right place. Tonight, our journey takes us back to an age when the air itself was different, thicker, richer, and shimmering with possibilities. We're traveling to a time after the great Devonian extinctions, when the Earth was healing and life was beginning to experiment in ways it never had before. This was a world of endless swamps and silent alien forests, a world that belonged not to fish or dinosaurs, but to the first true giants of the land. This is the story of the Carboniferous Period. Imagine a world emerging from a long, quiet fever. The late Devonian period had been a time of crisis. The great coral kingdoms of the sea had crumbled, the armored fish had vanished, and the planet's climate had been thrown into turmoil. But life is resilient. In the aftermath, new opportunities arose. As we enter the Carboniferous, around 359 million years ago, the planet is breathing differently. The continents have continued their slow dance, gathering together into the great supercontinent of Pangaea. Much of the landmass is clustered around the equator, creating a vast tropical belt. The climate is warm, humid, and stable. And on the land, something revolutionary is happening. The forests that began in the Devonian are now conquering the continents. But these are not the forests we know. There are no flowers, no fruits, no birdsong. Instead, a silent green empire is spreading across the low-lying plains. This vast expanse of plant life is doing something extraordinary to the planet's atmosphere. It is breathing in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen on the scale never seen before. The air begins to change. The concentration of oxygen, which today sits at around 21%, starts to climb. It rises to 25%, then 30%, and at its peak, it may have reached an astonishing 35%. This is the crystal air of the Carboniferous. An atmosphere so rich in oxygen that it would have made the sky a deeper blue, and fire, once sparked, would have burned with an almost explosive intensity. To breathe this air would feel different. It would be heavier, more potent. For the life that was adapting to it, this abundance of oxygen was like a magical fuel. It supercharged metabolisms, allowing bodies to grow to sizes that seem fantastical to us now. The stage was being set for an age of giants.
Let us walk into this world. The ground beneath our feet is soft and damp. A thick carpet of fallen leaves and decaying matter that has not yet learned how to fully rot. The air is thick with moisture, smelling of wet earth, fermentation, and the strange resinous scent of plants that no longer exist. Above us, the canopy is a dense ceiling of green, but the trees are alien. There are no mighty oaks or towering redwoods. Instead, there are scale trees, Lepidodendron, their trunks covered in a diamond-patterned bark, rising 30 or 40 meters into the sky like colossal pillars. They do not branch until the very top, where they unfurl a crown of ribbon-like leaves. Beside them stand giant horsetails, calamithes, their segmented, bamboo-like stems reaching towards the light. And everywhere, there are ferns. Ferns of every shape and size, from delicate fronds carpeting the ground to tree ferns that form a dense understory. The world is green and silent. The silence is one of the most striking things. There are no birds to sing the dawn, no mammals to rustle in the undergrowth. The only sounds are the whisper of wind through the strange foliage, the drip of water from leaf to leaf, and the slow, steady hum of unseen life. This is a world of swamps. Vast, continent-spanning wetlands stretch across the equatorial belt. The high sea levels have flooded the lowlands, creating a labyrinth of shallow waterways, murky pools, and peat bogs. The water is dark, stained brown by tannins from the decaying plants. It moves slowly, almost standing still in places. This is the perfect environment for the first vertebrates to truly explore the land. But they are not yet kings here. They are still tied to the water. In the shallows, you might see them. Great amphibians, known as labyrinthodonts, lurk like crocodiles. Some are over 2 meters long, with flat heads, wide jaws filled with sharp teeth, and bodies adapted for life at the edge of the water. They are the dominant predators of the swamps, hunting fish and perhaps one another. They are still bound by the old rules of life. They must lay their eggs in water, and their young must begin their lives as gilled tadpoles. Their skin needs to stay moist so they can never stray too far from the damp embrace of the swamp. For them, the vast dry interiors of the continents are an impassable desert. But another kind of creature is beginning to appear. Small lizard-like animals, scuttling at the edges of the forest. They are the first reptiles, and they carry within them an invention that will change the world. The amniotic egg. An egg with a protective shell. A private pond that allows them to leave the water behind completely. In this Carboniferous world, they are still small, still minor players in an ecosystem dominated by amphibians and the coming giants. But they are the future. As we stand at the edge of one of these great coal swamps, we are looking at a pivotal moment in Earth's history. The planet is balanced on a knife's edge. The over-oxygenated atmosphere is creating a world of giants. But it is also making the world dangerously flammable. The endless forests are locking away so much carbon that they are cooling the planet, sowing the seeds of a future ice age. This world of lush, vibrant life is also a world of deep paradox. It is a greenhouse, yet it is on a path to freezing. It is a world of incredible growth, yet it is built on a foundation of incomplete decay. As you settle into your rest tonight, let this image of the early Carboniferous world fill your mind. A planet draped in green, breathing an air of crystal clarity. Imagine the silence of the scale tree forests, the dark, still waters of the swamps, and the heavy, humid air. This was the nursery of the giants. It was a world waiting for the consequences of its own abundance to unfold. In our next journey, we will step deeper into these alien forests, to understand the bizarre and beautiful trees that built this world, and how their life and death would shape not only their own time, but the future of our planet in ways they could never have imagined. For now, let the deep green silence of the Carboniferous carry you into a peaceful rest. Let the air of that lost world fill your dreams.
In our last journey, we witnessed a world reborn from the ashes of extinction, a planet healing itself, draped in vast, swampy forests and breathing an atmosphere rich with oxygen. We stood at the edge of the great Carboniferous wetlands, a green and silent kingdom waiting for its giants to rise. Tonight, we step out of the shallows and into the heart of its strangeness, the great coal forests. These were not merely collections of trees. They were planet-altering engines of life whose immense scale and alien forms created the very conditions for the Age of Giants. To understand this era, we must first walk beneath the canopy of these lost empires. Imagine standing in a forest where the trees have no true wood. The leaves are like giant green ribbons, and the ground is a spongy mat of life and half-decay. The light that filters through the canopy is dim and green, casting strange shadows on the forest floor. This is the kingdom of the lycopods. The dominant trees of the Carboniferous were not like the oaks or pines we know. They belong to an ancient lineage of plants called lycopods, which today survive only as small, humble club mosses creeping across forest floors. But in the Carboniferous, they were giants. The most magnificent of these was Lepidodendron, the scale tree. It towered up to 50 meters, its trunk straight and unbranching until the very top. Instead of bark, its trunk was covered in a beautiful diamond-shaped pattern of leaf scars, giving it the appearance of a reptile skin. This is where it gets its name, scale tree. These scars were left behind by leaves that fell off as the tree grew, a record of its own history etched into its body. At its peak, the trunk would split again and again into a crown of branches, each ending in a tuft of long grass-like leaves. It did not produce flowers or seeds. Instead, it reproduced with spores, held in cones that grew at the tips of its branches. When the time was right, these cones would release clouds of spores into the wind, a fine yellow dust that would settle over the swamps, hoping to find a place to grow. Beside it stood its close relative, Sigilliaria. It was similar in stature, another colossal pillar reaching for the sky, but its leaf scars were arranged in vertical rows, giving its trunk a ribbed appearance. Its crown was shorter, a fountain of long leaves bursting from the top. Together, Lepidodendron and Sigilliaria formed the upper canopy of these forests, a dense ceiling that captured most of the sunlight.
Their root systems were as strange as their crowns. They did not have a deep central taproot. Instead, their roots, called stigmaria, spread out in a shallow, radiating pattern from the base of the trunk. These forking, alien-looking roots anchored the massive trees in the soft, unstable swamp soil. Today, fossilized stigmaria are common, their strange, pockmarked surfaces a testament to the foundations of these ancient forests. Beneath this upper canopy was a dense understory of other bizarre plants. Towering horsetails, called calamites, grew in dense thickets, their jointed, bamboo-like stems reaching heights of 20 meters. They were essentially colossal versions of the small horsetails that grow along streams today. Their stems were hollow, and their leaves were simple whorls of needle-like structures at each joint. They created a forest within a forest, a maze of vertical stems that would have been difficult to navigate. And then there were the ferns. The Carboniferous is sometimes called the age of ferns, for good reason. They were everywhere. Some were small, carpeting the ground in lush layers. Others were tree ferns, with woody trunks and great arching fronds that created a lower canopy, filling a space between the forest floor and the crowns of the giant lycopods. Their intricate leaves, or fronds, were masters at capturing the dappled light that made it through the layers above. This multi-layered forest was incredibly efficient at capturing sunlight. Almost no light reached the forest floor, leaving it in a perpetual, humid twilight. And this is where one of the most important secrets of the Carboniferous lies. The ground was not soil as we know it. It was a thick, spongy layer of peat, composed of dead plant matter that was not fully decomposing. In these waterlogged swamps, there was very little oxygen in the soil. The bacteria and fungi that normally break down wood and dead leaves could not thrive here. Specifically, the microbes that could digest lignin, the tough, woody component of plants, had not yet evolved effectively. So when a giant lepidodendron fell, it did not rot away. It simply sank into the soft, acidic bog. Its massive trunk, along with countless leaves, spores, and branches, would become waterlogged and buried. Layer upon layer of this dead plant matter accumulated over thousands of years, forming peat deposits hundreds of meters thick. The forests were literally burying themselves alive. This process had two enormous consequences. First, by not decaying, the carbon stored in the bodies of these plants was not released back into the atmosphere. It was trapped, sequestered underground. This massive removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is what caused the planet to cool and oxygen levels to soar. The forests were engineering the planet's climate, trapping the world's heat in the ground. And the second, this buried plant matter would, over millions of years of pressure and heat, become the vast coal seams that power our world today. The electricity that lights your room, the energy that fuels our industries, much of it is the fossilized sunlight captured by these very forests 300 million years ago. Every piece of coal is a remnant of a lepidodendron or a giant fern that fell into a silent, oxygen-starved swamp. To walk through this forest would be an almost overwhelming sensory experience. The air is so heavy with moisture, it feels like you are breathing water. The smell is of dampness, of decay that is never complete, a sweet, earthy scent of peat and resin. The silence is broken only by the drip of water from the high canopy and the rustle of something unseen moving in the dense undergrowth of ferns. The scale is immense. The trunks of the scale trees rise like the columns of a cathedral, their patterned bark catching the dim green light. The forest floor is a treacherous maze of fallen logs, exposed roots, and pools of black, stagnant water. There is no clear path. To move through here is to push through a wall of life and death, all tangled together. These forests were not static. They were dynamic, living on a cycle of growth and collapse. The shallow root systems of the giant lycopods meant they were not very stable. A strong wind could topple them, and when one fell, it would bring down others in a domino effect, creating clearings in the forest. In these sunlit patches, younger plants and ferns would race to grow, starting the cycle anew. As you prepare for your own rest, let the image of this forest settle in your mind. This is not a place of fear, but of profound, ancient life. It is a world built on a different set of rules, where death did not mean decay, but preservation, where trees reached for the sky on foundations that were made of their own ancestors. This was the engine of the Carboniferous world. Its endless growth fueled the crystal air, and its incomplete death buried the world's heat. It was a system of immense power, but one that was, in its own way, unsustainable. It was creating the conditions for the giants that would soon walk its floors, but it was also setting the stage for its own eventual decline. In our next journey together, we will meet the creatures that called this alien forest home. We will see the first true giants of the land, the arthropods that grew to terrifying sizes in the oxygen-rich air. We will hear the buzz of dragonfly wings, nearly a meter wide, and imagine the sight of a millipede as long as a car, winding its way through the fern-choked twilight. For now, rest in the deep green silence of this lost world. Let the gentle drip of water from a billion ancient leaves be a lullaby, and let the heavy, peaceful air of the Carboniferous guide you into a deep and restorative sleep.
In our last journey, we walked through the great coal forests of the Carboniferous. We stood in the green twilight beneath colossal scale trees and giant ferns, in a world built on a foundation of life that could not fully decay. We felt the heavy, humid air, an atmosphere becoming supercharged with the gift of oxygen. Tonight, we will meet the inhabitants of that world. The crystal air did more than just fuel the growth of forests. It permeated the very bodies of the creatures living within them, allowing them to achieve sizes that seem like science fiction today. This was the age of giant insects and other arthropods, the first true giants to walk the land. Imagine the air in the Carboniferous forest. It is so rich with oxygen, perhaps 35% compared to our 21%, that it changes the rules of biology. For one group of animals in particular, the arthropods, the great lineage of creatures with exoskeletons and jointed legs, do not breathe with lungs as we do. Most terrestrial arthropods, like insects and myriapods, breathe through a network of tiny tubes called tracheae. These tubes run throughout their bodies, delivering oxygen directly to their tissues through passive diffusion. This system is efficient for small bodies, but it has a limit. As an animal gets larger, the tracheal network becomes too long and complex to supply enough oxygen to the inner tissues. This is why insects today are small. Our modern, thinner atmosphere simply cannot support giant ones. But in the Carboniferous, with so much more oxygen in the air, that limitation was lifted.
diffusion became supercharged. Oxygen could penetrate deeper and faster into the body, allowing arthropods to grow to sizes they had never achieved before and have never achieved since. Now, lift your gaze from the forest floor to the air above. A shadow passes over, large and swift. It is not a bird or a pterosaur. It is the blur of 4 intricately veined wings. This is Meganeura, a griffinfly, an ancient relative of the dragonfly.
But this is a dragonfly with a wingspan of nearly 75 centimeters, as wide as a modern seagull. It is one of the largest insects that has ever flown. Its huge, multifaceted eyes, each containing thousands of lenses, give it a panoramic view of its surroundings, making it a formidable aerial predator. Imagine the sound its wings would make. Not the delicate buzz of a modern dragonfly, but a deep, resonant hum, a rhythmic beat that you would feel as much as hear. It hovers for a moment, its long body suspended in the thick, oxygen-rich air, then darts with incredible speed to snatch a smaller insect, or perhaps even a small amphibian with its spiny legs. The crystal air made this possible. Flying requires immense energy, and the high oxygen levels allowed the flight muscles of insects like Meganeura to perform at a level that would be impossible today. The air was not only richer but also denser, which may have helped provide more lift for their massive wings. The skies of the Carboniferous belonged to them. They were the kings and queens of the air long before the first bird or pterosaur took flight. The world of giants was not limited to the slow and the swift. In the shadows, other predators lurked. Imagine peeling back the bark of a fallen scale tree. A scorpion scuttles out, but it is the length of your forearm. This is Pulmonoscorpius, the breathing scorpion. Like its modern relatives, it was a hunter, armed with powerful pincers and a venomous sting at the tip of its tail. It hunted other arthropods and perhaps small vertebrates, a fearsome predator of the forest floor. Its size, again, was a gift of the oxygenated air. It was a walking testament to the strange and wonderful possibilities of this era. Even the spiders, though not as dramatically large as the other groups, were significant predators in this ecosystem. They did not spin ornate webs like many modern spiders, but were likely ground-dwelling hunters, ambushing their prey from burrows or among the leaf litter. This ecosystem of giant arthropods was a fully functioning world. The giant millipedes, like Arthropora, were the primary decomposers. The flying predators, like Meganeura, controlled the air. And the ground hunters, like giant scorpions and spiders, patrolled the shadows. It is a world that can be difficult to picture, so different is it from our own. A world where the largest animal you might meet on a walk through the forest is not a deer or a bear, but a 2-meter-long millipede. A world where the sky is patrolled by dragonflies the size of hawks. This was a unique window in Earth's history. The conditions were perfect. The evolution of vast forests produced the oxygen, and the arthropods, with their unique respiratory system, were perfectly positioned to take advantage of it. It was a beautiful, temporary alignment of geology and biology. As you settle into your rest, try to immerse yourself in this world. Feel the profound peace of the ancient forest, but also the vibrant life pulsing within it. Picture the slow, steady march of Arthropleura through the ferns, its many legs moving in perfect unison. Hear the deep hum of Meganeura's wings as it darts through a sunlit clearing. See the glint of an exoskeleton as a giant scorpion waits patiently in the shadows. These were not monsters. They were pioneers. They were the first creatures to build a complex, large-scale ecosystem entirely on land. They were the rulers of a world that existed long before the dinosaurs, and in their own way, they were just as magnificent. But this golden age, like all golden ages, could not last forever. The very conditions that allowed these giants to thrive were unstable. The climate was beginning to change, and the crystal air would not last. In our next journey, we will return to the waters of the great swamps to meet the other rulers of the Carboniferous, the giant amphibians who shared this world, and the first reptiles who were plotting to inherit it. For now, let the hum of giant wings be your lullaby. Let the image of a world ruled by magnificent insects carry you into your dreams. Rest in the knowledge that our planet has been home to wonders beyond our wildest imagining.
We have walked through the silent, alien forests of the Carboniferous and witnessed the giant arthropods that thrived in its crystal air. We have seen a world where the land was ruled by creatures with exoskeletons, long before the age of vertebrates truly began. But the Carboniferous world was defined by water as much as by land. It was an age of swamps, a planet-spanning wetland that created a unique meeting point between the aquatic and terrestrial realms. Tonight, our journey takes us to the dark, murky waters of these swamps to meet the other giants of this era, the great amphibians. Imagine yourself at the edge of a vast Carboniferous swamp. The air is heavy and still, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying vegetation. The water is dark and glassy, reflecting the strange silhouettes of the scale trees that rise from its edges. This is not a place of clear streams or open lakes. It is a labyrinth of shallow pools, stagnant channels, and floating mats of vegetation. For hundreds of millions of years, the vertebrates had been largely confined to the water. The Devonian period had been the age of fishes, and while some had made the first tentative steps towards land, the conquest was far from complete. In the Carboniferous, the amphibians became the first vertebrate group to truly thrive at the boundary of land and water. These were not the small, delicate frogs and salamanders we know today. The amphibians of the Carboniferous were giants, the apex predators of the aquatic ecosystems. Known as labyrinthodonts for the maze-like infolding of the enamel on their teeth, these creatures were formidable hunters. Picture one of them, perhaps a creature like Ariops. It is over 2 meters long, with a body like a heavy-set crocodile and a massive, flattened skull. Its wide jaws are lined with sharp, conical teeth. It spends most of its time in the water, its eyes and nostrils perched on top of its head, allowing it to see and breathe, while the rest of its body remains submerged. A school of ancient fish swims by. With a sudden, explosive burst of power from its muscular tail, the amphibian lunges, its great jaws snapping shut. The hunt is swift and decisive. For the smaller creatures of the swamp, these giant amphibians were the monsters in the dark water. The swamps were their kingdom. They came in many shapes and sizes. Some were long and slender, like eels,
adapted for navigating the dense aquatic vegetation. Others were flat-bodied, bottom dwellers, ambushing prey from the muddy floor. Some even had bizarre boomerang-shaped heads, their function still a mystery to scientists.
This was the peak of amphibian diversity. They had inherited the world from the fishes, and for a time, they were the undisputed vertebrate rulers. They were perfectly adapted to this world of water and half land. The warm, wet climate and the endless swamps provided the perfect habitat for a life cycle that was still tied to the water. Like modern amphibians, they laid their eggs in the still pools of the swamp. These were soft, jelly-like eggs with no protective shell, which would dry out in the open air. From these eggs hatched gilled larvae, tadpoles, that would spend their early lives entirely underwater, breathing with gills like their fish ancestors. Only after a long metamorphosis, where they would lose their gills and develop lungs, could they venture onto the damp earth at the water's edge. This two-part life cycle, this double life, as the name amphibian implies, was a brilliant adaptation that allowed them to exploit both aquatic and terrestrial food sources. But it was also a chain, binding them forever to the presence of water. And in this world, a new kind of creature was beginning to break that chain. Look closely at the edge of the swamp. Among the roots of a giant fern, a small animal, no bigger than your hand, scuttles out of the shadows. It looks like a lizard. Its skin is not smooth and moist, but dry and scaly, a waterproof coat that protects it from desiccation. This is one of the very first reptiles. It is a small player in this world of giants. It is hunted by the large amphibians in the water and by the giant arthropods on land. But it possesses a secret weapon, an evolutionary innovation so profound that it will allow its descendants to conquer the entire planet. This is the amniotic egg. Imagine an egg, but not the soft, vulnerable egg of an amphibian. This egg has a tough, leathery shell that protects the embryo inside from drying out. Within the shell is a complete life support system, a nutrient-rich yolk to feed the embryo, and a series of membranes that manage waste and gas exchange. One of these membranes, the amnion, encloses the embryo in its own private pond, a sac of fluid that recreates the aquatic environment needed for development. The amniotic egg was a declaration of independence from the water. With this invention, the reptiles were no longer tied to the swamps to reproduce. They could lay their eggs on dry land, in the heart of the forest, far from the reach of aquatic predators. Their young would not hatch as gilled tadpoles, but as miniature air-breathing adults, ready to live on land from the moment they emerged. In the Carboniferous, this advantage was only just beginning to be felt. The first reptiles, like Hylonis, were small insectivores, living in the shadows of the great forests, perhaps hiding in the hollowed-out stumps of fallen lycopod trees. They were quick and agile, their small size allowing them to hunt the abundant insects and other arthropods of the forest floor. They were pioneers of a new way of life. While the giant amphibians ruled the swamp, the reptiles were exploring the drier interiors.
They were laying the groundwork for a future where vertebrates would not just visit the land, but truly live there. As you drift toward sleep, picture this balance of power in the Carboniferous world. The giant amphibians, lords of the swamp, powerful but constrained by their ancient bond with water. The giant arthropods, rulers of the forest floor, thriving in the crystalline air. And the small, secretive reptiles, carrying the future in a shell.
It is a world of transitions. A world where the old rulers are at their peak, but the heirs to the kingdom are already present, waiting in the wings. Evolution is not always a story of dramatic battles and sudden takeovers. Sometimes it is a quiet, gradual shift where a small advantage, like a shelled egg, slowly and inexorably changes the balance of power over millions of years. The great amphibians did not know that their time was limited. They were the kings of their world, perfectly adapted and powerful. But the world itself was beginning to change. The climate would not remain warm and wet forever, and when the great swamps began to dry, their kingdom would shrink with them. In our next journey, we will explore the legacy of this incredible period. We will see how the death of the endless forests was preserved in the earth, creating a gift of buried sunlight that would one day fuel a new age of giants, the age of humans. For now, rest in the humid stillness of the Carboniferous swamp. Listen to the deep calls of the amphibians echoing through the misty night, and let the quiet promise of a new kind of life, carried in a simple egg, guide you into your dreams.
We have journeyed through a world of giants, from the colossal insects of the crystal air to the great amphibians lurking in the dark waters of the swamps. We have seen a planet draped in an endless green forest, a living engine that was reshaping the very atmosphere. But the story of the Carboniferous is not just about the life that thrived during that time. It is also about what that life left behind. The endless cycle of growth in those ancient forests was matched by a profound inability to decay. And in that simple fact lies one of the most significant legacies of any geological era. Tonight, our journey takes us deeper, not into the forest or the swamp, but into the ground itself. We will explore how the immense vitality of the Carboniferous was buried and transformed into a gift of stored energy. The buried sunlight that we call coal. Imagine a single Lepidodendron tree, a scale tree, at the end of its life. It has stood for decades, perhaps a century, its crown of leaves capturing sunlight, converting it into life through the magic of photosynthesis. It has weathered countless storms, its shallow roots holding firm in the spongy peat. But now, its time is over. A gust of wind, a shift in the unstable ground, and the giant topples over with a great, slow crash. It falls into the dark, acidic water of the swamp. It is submerged. In the forests we know today, this would be the beginning of the end. Fungi with specialized enzymes would begin to break down the tough lignin in its wood. Bacteria would swarm its tissues,
Termites and other insects would burrow into it. Within years, the mighty trunk would be reduced to soft, crumbling humus. Its carbon returned to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Its nutrients recycled back into the soil for new life to use. But in the Carboniferous swamp, this process barely began. The water was anoxic, starved of oxygen. And crucially, the fungi and bacteria that had evolved to efficiently decompose lignin were either absent or not yet widespread. The tough, woody material of the scale trees and giant ferns was almost indigestible to the microbes of the time. So the fallen giant did not rot. It simply lay there, preserved in the sterile, acidic water. It became waterlogged, and slowly, over time, it was buried. This was not an isolated event. It happened on an unimaginable scale. For tens of millions of years, across entire continents, the great coal forests grew, died, and sank into the bogs. Layer upon layer of dead plant matter, trunks, leaves, roots, spores, accumulated, forming immense deposits of peat. The forests were not just growing, they were accumulating. The rate of production far outpaced the rate of decay. As the millennia passed, these peat beds were buried deeper. The slow movements of the Earth's crust, the deposition of sediments from rivers, and the shifting of seas covered them with layers of mud, sand, and rock. As they sank deeper into the earth, they were subjected to immense pressure and heat. The pressure squeezed out the water and other volatile compounds. The heat rearranged the carbon atoms. The soft, spongy peat was slowly cooked and compressed. First, it became lignite, a soft brown coal. Deeper still, it became bituminous coal, the hard black rock we are most familiar with. In some places, where the heat and pressure were most intense, it was transformed into anthracite, the purest and most energy-dense form of coal. This entire process is a form of fossilization. But instead of preserving the shape of a single bone or shell, it preserved the stored energy of an entire ecosystem. Every lump of coal is a piece of a 300-million-year-old forest. It is buried sunlight. The energy that once streamed from the sun and was captured by the leaves of a scale tree was not released, it was trapped, held in the chemical bonds of carbon, waiting.
The scale of this process is difficult to comprehend. The Carboniferous Period is named for this abundance of coal. It is the age of carbon. The vast coal seams found today in North America, Europe, and Asia are the direct legacy of these ancient swamps. Some of these seams are over 10 meters thick, representing thousands of years of uninterrupted accumulation of plant matter. This massive sequestration of carbon had a profound effect on the planet. By removing so much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and burying it, the forests of the Carboniferous dramatically cooled the global climate. The greenhouse effect was weakened, and for the first time in a very long time, great ice sheets began to form at the poles. The planet was heading towards an ice age, ironically triggered by an era of unprecedented growth. As you settle into your rest, try to hold this immense, slow process in your mind. Picture the silent, patient transformation happening deep within the earth. The weight of mountains pressing down, the heat of the planet's core rising from below,
the slow geological alchemy that turns a forest into a stone that burns. This story connects us in the most direct way to that lost world. The light that allows you to see in the dark, the warmth that heats your home, the power that runs the device you're listening on. Much of it is the ghost of the Carboniferous. We are living in the sunlight of a world that vanished 300 million years ago. There is a deep poetry in this. The energy that fueled the age of giant insects now fuels the age of humans. The connection is tangible, physical. We have drilled into the planet's memory and brought that ancient sunlight back to the surface. But this gift came with a cost that the Carboniferous world could never have anticipated. By burning this coal, we are releasing that trapped carbon back into the atmosphere in the geological blink of an eye. We are reversing the process that took millions of years, unwinding the climatic changes that ended the Carboniferous and shaped the world that followed. We are, in a sense, reintroducing the air of a long-gone era to a world that is no longer adapted to it. The story of coal is therefore a story of cycles, a cycle of growth, burial, and resurrection, a cycle of climate change, both ancient and modern. Let your mind drift back to the swamp. Feel the peace of a world where this cycle was only just beginning. The fallen trees are not yet coal. They are just silent forms resting in the dark water. The carbon is not yet fuel. It is just the building block of life. The sunlight is not yet a memory. It is still streaming through the canopy, fresh and new every day. The legacy of the Carboniferous is all around us, not just in the coal seams beneath our feet, but in the very air we breathe. The high oxygen levels of that time may have declined, but the fundamental shift had been made. The planet had become a world where complex air-breathing life could thrive on a grand scale. In our final journey into this era, we will witness the end of this unique period. We will see how the world created by the great coal forests eventually turned against them, leading to a great drying that brought an end to the age of giants and paved the way for a new dynasty, the reptiles. For now, rest in the deep, quiet pressure of geological time. Let the slow transformation of a forest into stone be a metaphor for the deep restorative changes that happen within you during sleep. Let the buried sunlight of the Carboniferous warm your dreams.
We have journeyed through a world of impossible giants and endless forests. We have felt the crystal air of the Carboniferous and understood how its buried sunlight came to power our own age. We have seen a planet at the peak of its lush, swampy glory. But no age lasts forever. The very forces that made the Carboniferous so unique, the vast forests, the high oxygen levels, the burial of carbon, were slowly pushing the planet towards a dramatic transformation. Tonight, in our final visit to this lost world, we will witness the end of an era. We will see how the great swamps began to retreat, how the crystal air grew thin, and how the age of giant amphibians and insects gave way to a new, drier world. This is the story of the Carboniferous rainforest collapse. Imagine the great equatorial swamps, which had stretched like a green ocean across Pangaea for tens of millions of years. For generations beyond counting, the climate had been stable, warm, and wet. The cycle of life in the swamp seemed eternal. But deep in the southern hemisphere, a change was gathering force. The massive burial of carbon by the coal forests had been cooling the planet. As global temperatures dropped, a great ice cap began to grow over the southern part of Pangaea. This was the late Paleozoic Ice Age. As more and more water was locked up in these immense glaciers, sea levels began to fall. The shallow seas that fed the coastal swamps retreated, and the climate grew drier and more seasonal. The change was not sudden. It was a slow, creeping drying that unfolded over thousands of years. But for the rainforests, which depended on constant moisture, it was a death sentence. The vast, continuous belt of swampy forest began to break apart. What was once a single, continent-spanning ecosystem fragmented into smaller, isolated pockets of green, separated by increasingly arid plains. The world was drying out. For the life that had evolved in the perpetual dampness of the swamps, this was a catastrophe. The giant lycopod trees like Lepidodendron and Sigillaria, with their shallow root systems adapted for boggy ground, could not survive in the drier, more stable soils. They began to die out, their patterned trunks becoming a rarer sight in the landscape. The colossal horsetails and tree ferns, also dependent on abundant water, retreated with the swamps. The endless forests that had defined the age began to shrink and wither. The impact on the animal kingdom was even more profound. The giant arthropods, the rulers of the land, were the first to feel the effects. Their massive sizes were only possible because of the super-oxygenated air, which was a direct product of the thriving forests. As the forests shrank, oxygen levels in the atmosphere began to fall. The crystal air grew thin. For creatures like the giant dragonfly Meganura, this was devastating. The denser, oxygen-rich air had provided both the fuel for its powerful flight muscles and the lift for its enormous wings. In the thinner, less oxygenated air, flying became harder, more metabolically expensive. The giant dragonflies could no longer sustain their size. Over generations, they either shrank or vanished. For the ground-dwelling giant Arthropleura, the change was equally dire. The drying of the swamps eliminated its habitat and its primary food source of decaying, wet vegetation. The giant millipedes, once the undisputed kings of the forest floor, had nowhere left to go.
The entire ecosystem that had supported the age of giant insects was collapsing. The unique window in Earth's history that had allowed them to thrive was closing. The great amphibians, the labyrinthodons, also faced a crisis. Their lives were inextricably tied to the water. As the swamps dried up and fragmented, their kingdom was reduced to a series of shrinking oases. They were trapped. Their permeable skin needed moisture, and their jelly-like eggs needed water. The drying world was becoming a desert to them. While some lineages would survive by adapting to a more terrestrial existence, the era of the giant, swamp-dwelling amphibians was over. But in every great extinction, there are winners as well as losers. As the humid, stable world of the swamps collapsed, it created an opportunity for a different kind of ecosystem and a different kind of animal. The drier, more seasonal climate favored hardier plants. Ferns and lycopods gave way to the first great seed plants like conifers. These plants were better adapted to survive dry spells, their seeds capable of waiting for the right conditions to sprout. The forests were changing, becoming more open and resilient. And in these new forests, the small, unassuming reptiles found their moment. The amniotic egg, their revolutionary invention, was the key to this new world. While the amphibians were trapped by the retreating waters, the reptiles were free. They could lay their shelled eggs on dry land, far from any swamp. The drying of the planet was not a crisis for them. It was an invitation. They began to diversify, evolving into new forms to fill the ecological niches left vacant by the declining amphibians and arthropods. Some became larger herbivores, learning to digest the tough new plants. Others became swift predators, hunting the smaller reptiles and surviving amphibians. Their waterproof, scaly skin was a significant advantage in the arid climate, protecting them from water loss. And their more efficient lungs and metabolisms allowed them to thrive in the less oxygenated air. The world that was poison to the giant insects was perfectly habitable for the reptiles. This event, known as the Carboniferous rainforest collapse, was one of the most significant ecological turnovers in Earth's history. It was not a sudden impact, but a slow, climate-driven transition that completely reshaped life on land. The old guard, the lycopod forests, the giant arthropods, the labyrinthodont amphibians gave way to the new, the conifer forests, and the rising dynasty of the reptiles. The world that emerged at the end of the Carboniferous as it transitioned into the Permian period was a very different place. It was a world that would look, for the first time, vaguely familiar to our modern eyes. A world of seed-bearing trees, of dominant, fully terrestrial vertebrates. A world poised for the coming age of reptiles, which would ultimately lead to the dinosaurs.
As you prepare for sleep, reflect on this profound, slow-motion collapse. It is a story not of failure, but of transition. The Carboniferous world was not a mistake of evolution. It was a perfect system for its time. But time moves on, and the planet is always changing. The story of the Great Drying is a humbling reminder that even the most successful forms of life are contingent on the world around them. The giants of the Carboniferous were not weak. Their world simply moved away from them. Let the image of this changing world guide you into your rest. Picture the great-scale trees falling, not to be buried in swamps, but to decay in the dry air. Hear the silence in the skies where giant dragonflies no longer hum. Feel the new warmth of the sun on a drier, more open plain, where the first great reptiles are beginning to claim the earth as their own. Every end is a beginning. The collapse of the coal forests was a tragedy for the life that depended on them, but it was the necessary condition for the world that came next. The story of our planet is a story of these cycles, of creation and destruction, of one world giving way to the next. The crystal air of the Carboniferous has faded, but its legacy is all around us, in the coal that powers our world, in the reptiles that became dinosaurs, birds, and mammals, and in the profound lesson that life must always adapt or fade into memory. Rest now in the quiet knowledge that the story of life is always moving forward, finding new ways to thrive in a world that never, ever stands still.